Hey guys, let's get straight to the point. The first reason why the Sigma 18-50mm F2.8 APS-C lens is my favorite lens for my Sony FX30 is because of the image quality. It's absolutely amazing. I came from a Sony a7 IV with a 24mm to 70mm f2.8 lens, full frame lens, and I don't feel like I'm losing that much in terms of image quality because the Sigma lens is super sharp on the FX30 but not clinically sharp. As you know already, I don't like clinically sharp lenses, especially when I'm doing videos because I don't want the subject to be like a 3D cutout popping off of the background. That's why a overly sharpened photo lens usually is not my favorite choice. But the Sigma 18-50mm f2.8, it's basically living on my FX30 as you can see. I have never put another lens on this camera because this is all I need for at least for my projects. So I do a lot of dance videos, music videos, and projects like video portraits for my friends and clients, and they are absolutely happy with the performance of this lens. The image is really sharp but not overly sharpened. The rendition from focus to out of focus area, it's really smooth. So you don't see this like sharp edge cutting the subject out of the background. That's really, really important to me. And another thing is the autofocus performance of this lens is really, really good. It's smooth, fast, and silent. So those things are basically all I need when it comes to an autofocus lens because you don't want a lens that is like moving really robotic when it comes to autofocus. It jumps from one thing to another. And another thing is you don't want a lens that is loud when it's pulling focus for you because sometimes you might have to record audio on your camera and you don't want that motor sound to be captured on your microphone. And also the focus breathing is really, really minimal and well controlled on this Sigma lens. I basically don't see any focus breathing when I am zooming from, not zooming, but focusing from far to close or close to far. So you don't see the frame changing when it's pulling focus. So that's really important for video as well. Another thing is there's not a lot of chromatic aberration as I noticed, even when I am filming something outdoor with bright sunlight, and you will see chromatic aberration, especially when you are filming, let's say, trees or bushes with the sun behind. You'll see all these like purple fringing and green fringing, and that is really hard to remove, especially in videos. So not that much. At least I didn't notice it. You can see it in my samples. So not much chromatic aberration, which is really, really, really good. And also, the minimum focus distance of this lens is really good. You can basically use it almost like a macro lens, but not like super extremely close. But it can get really, really close. It can, let's say, fill a frame with an SD card. That's how close you can get with this Sigma 18-50 f2.8 lens. Also, when it comes to flaring and ghosting, I didn't notice that much. Ghosting wise, there's a little bit when it comes to filming something that is super bright. Let's say you have a spotlight or the sun directly pointing at the lens, then you'll see a little bit of ghosting. But when it comes to flaring, it's not that distracting. I think it's really pleasant to look at and it doesn't wash out your image that much. So the contrast is still remain when you're using this lens pointing at a strong light source. The only thing about image quality that you might complain about, I'm not complaining at least, is its lack of character, if you will, because this is a modern day lens. It doesn't have that characteristics where, oh, you'll get like swirly bokeh or background, and also it doesn't have like weird like chromatic aberration or halation that some vintage lenses or some cinema lenses will give you. So this is a modern day lens. It's a clean image, but you can definitely add those halation and chromatic aberration if you want in post. That's what I've been doing with DaVinci Resolve. I will show you guys some samples with those effects added. The next reason why this lens is my favorite lens is because of the size and weight. As you can see, it's not that big. This is an APS-C camera. I know the lens or the camera that I'm recording this video with has a little bit of a distortion, so it might look a little bit bigger than real life, but it's not that bad. It's super tiny. It's like one of those tiny pop cans, if you will. So this is how big it is. This is really, really good when it comes to using with a gimbal. It's lightweight and it's not that big, so it's really easy to balance, and the gimbal is not stressing out the motors, so you will get great battery life when you're using a gimbal with this combination. Because I use a lot of gimbal, I do a lot of gimbal work when I'm filming dance video because I have to move like really quickly and I don't want shaky footage. This is one of the reasons why I really like using this lens. I can use it with the gimbal with no problem whatsoever. It's really easy to balance too. It is like a kit lens kind of size, but maybe a little bit heavier and a little bit longer, and that's pretty much it. Another thing about a small lens is you get smaller filter thread size at the front. It is 55mm filter thread, so you can get filters at a much cheaper price. ND filters, variable ND filters, mist filters, they are way cheaper compared to buying a 82mm, let's say a huge, bigger size filter for full frame lenses. My full frame 24 to 70mm f2.8 from Samyang uses 82mm as a filter thread, so those filters are really expensive, but 55mm is much cheaper when it comes to filter prices. When it comes to build quality, it's not the best. This is not metal, this is a plastic lens. I think the whole thing is plastic except the mount. Don't quote me on that, but lens mount is made of metal, but the body itself is made of plastic and rubber. So it's probably not gonna be the most durable lens, but I take really good care of my gear. It really depends on your workflow. If you can't take care of your gear that well, then you might want to consider getting a more solid lens, but this is good enough for me. It's definitely not a premium quality kind of lens, but it's not bad if you can take good care of your gear. Another thing is this lens is not fully weather sealed if I am not mistaken, so you might not want to use it in, let's say, heavy rain. I don't use my gear in rain at all because as much as I want to trust the weather sealing of my gear, I really don't want to risk this $4,000 setup being in heavy rain. So that's how I see it. There's no weather seal, but not fully weather seal, so don't risk it in heavy rain. The focus ring and the zoom ring are really well dampened. They are made out of plastic or rubber, if you will. This is rubber, and the internal zoom range is made of, the barrel is made of plastic as well. One thing to notice is you can see that the lens extend quite a bit when you are zooming in. So if the size is really important to you, this is not a pancake lens, it's gonna extend when you zoom in quite a bit. It's almost like double the size or the length. One tip when I am using this with a gimbal is to balance it kind of midway at around like 35 on the lens marking or 28 on the lens. And that way, because I'm using a DJI RS2, if you are using RS3, that's even better. The motor is going to be okay if you change your focal length midway during filming, so you don't have to rebalance the whole setup. I know it's going to put a little bit of stress on your motors of your gimbal, so try it at your own risk, but I do this with my own setup and it's totally fine. So that's how I would set it up with a gimbal. One very minor and personal thing about having this kind of smaller lenses on a APS-C camera especially, this is, okay, the FX30 is not really an APS-C size camera because it's the same size as the full frame FX3. So the camera body is quite big and heavy, especially with the full cage on right now. But because the lens is so small, people would think that you're using a kit lens and it's like, you know, a basic camera, nothing super serious. So this will attract way less attention compared to having a full frame camera with a full frame 24 to 70mm f2.8 lens. Oh, by the way, this range 18 to 50, it's about 27, 28 to 75mm full frame equivalent. So that's why I've been comparing this with the 24 to 70 full frame lens that I have. That one, the full frame version, it's like double the size and double the weight, or even more than double the weight of this lens. So it's a huge setup, especially when you want to take it out and take some photos or videos on the street, that one will attract way more attention, and I don't like that. I always want to have my gear as small as possible because I carry them almost every day. So this is another plus for me having a smaller lens. Okay, talking about the bokeh and low light capability of this or performance of this lens, it's not going to be the same compared to a full frame equivalent lens because it's an APS-C lens. It's gonna be used on the APS-C sensor. So low light wise is not gonna be as good, but because Sony cameras are really good at low light, I have been using it on the FX30, filming a lot of low light stuff. I don't see that big of an issue when it comes to low light performance. Yes, I will be using the second native ISO on the FX30, which is only 2500 compared to other cameras. A7 IV is 3200 and FX3 is super high, like 12,800. So it's not comparable, but because I color grade my footage using DaVinci Resolve, which is the studio version, the one that you have to pay for, which is absolutely worth it. I highly recommend everyone who wants to try to color grade or even just want to make your image better to get the studio version because you get noise reduction. If I'm not mistaken, with the paid version, you can reduce a lot of noise, chroma noise and also regular noise in the shadows area, and it cleans up the image really well with just really minimal kind of reduction. So I have a noise reduction node, which is like a layer on my workflow, DaVinci workflow, all the time for this setup, the FX30 and the APS-C Sigma lens. So every time when I color grade, I have that noise reduction on there already. And one thing I noticed using that kind of workflow is when you have a noise reduction on there all the time, it kind of smoothen out your image a little bit, so it makes everything smoother and not as clinical again. So it helps a little bit, even like when it comes to image quality, having the noise reduction on the whole time. I have it on the whole time. So that's how I color grade the FX30 image with this lens combo. Noise reduction on there all the time. So low light, I don't see any issue. I'm not complaining compared to my A7 IV. So at least no one is complaining. My friends, my clients, they're happy with the image. I think it's really clean after the noise reduction. So low light, no problem. When it comes to bokeh, yes, you're not gonna get that much background blur compared to a full frame equivalent setup because of the sensor size and also the focal length, but I don't see that big of a difference, to be honest with you. I've been using the A7 IV for over a year now, and when I switch over to the FX30 with this lens, I don't see that big of a difference. The compression is nice, the separation is nice, the background separation is still really nice, the rendition is nice. I personally don't blur out everything in the background. I really don't like that, because I want to show the environment. I want to show the environment of where I'm filming, and that's why we film at a location. So if a super blurry background is what you like, you're not gonna get it with this combo, compared to full frame at least. But for me, it looks better with a little bit clearer background compared to like blurring everything to like absolutely nothing. So that's why the bokeh is gonna be okay. It's not gonna be super blurry. And the bokeh balls are not bad. You will see some cat eyes on the edges of the frame, but I'm not complaining. It's not super busy. It doesn't have too much of a halo effect when it comes to the bokeh balls. They are not too distracting even when you're filming something in the background, let's say bushes or like trees, leaves. Usually they get like super busy if your bokeh balls of your lens is not that clean or not that great, but I don't see that big of an issue there with this lens. My only complaints about this lens is they're really minor. The first thing is the barrel distortion when you're using 18mm on the lens. It's quite fisheye like, especially when you have like straight lines at the top and the bottom. When I was filming at the studio, we have like, of course we have a ceiling and a floor. So those top and bottom, you will see like a arc almost. So that's my biggest complaint because it's really hard to remove that in video. So barrel distortion, not my favorite. At 18mm, which is the widest focal length of this lens, you will see the distortion. When it comes to the 50mm range, it's not that bad, but you will have some kind of cushion, kind of pillow type distortion, which is the opposite of barrel distortion. It curves in, but it's not that bad. It's definitely not as obvious as the barrel distortion. My second minor complaint is the not fully weather seal thing. I said I don't use my gear in the rain, but it's still kind of safer, or you feel safer if it's fully weather sealed. I will use it in super light rain. When droplets of like rain got onto my gear, I'm not gonna freak out, but it kind of made me nervous that the lens is not fully weather sealed. So that's just a minor thing. I think I talked about it earlier. The lens gets quite long when you zoom in all the way to 50mm. That's another minor thing. It doesn't feel good when the lens is like moving in and out. I hope, or I wish, that the lens zoom is done internally, but if that's the case, then the lens is gonna stay long the whole time if it's internal. I know that. So the lens will get quite long when you're zooming in. The last minor complaint I have is the lens is a little bit plasticky. It's not the most premium built lens, but again, I take good care of my gear, so that's not the biggest deal, but just be careful, like try not to like hit the lens with anything. Don't drop it. Like, you shouldn't drop it even when it's made of metal, but my suggestion is just take good care of it and you should be fine. So who is this lens for? I would say if you do a lot of gimbal work, definitely get this lens. You will be able to use the whole range if your gimbal is strong enough. Let's say you're having a RS2 or RS3 gimbal, then it should be able to handle the whole range without you rebalancing the gimbal. But again, do it at your own risk. I do it that way because I need a really quick change of focal length all the time. And because of the amazing video performance, basically anyone with a Sony APS-C camera should consider getting this lens. But if your camera does not have in-body image stabilization, IBIS, then you might want to look at something that has lens stabilization, because this lens doesn't have stabilization. So your footage might be really shaky unless you are running it on a gimbal the whole time. So no stabilization on the lens, that's one thing to keep in mind. But if you want really good performance in terms of video, yes, get this lens. When it comes to photos, I don't think this lens will be that great compared to anything with a faster aperture. Let's say an f1.4 or even f1.8 lens will probably have better separation when it comes to the subject and the background. So maybe this is not the best for portrait photography, but you can still use it. It's just not gonna beat those lenses. With the price tag of around $500, I don't think anything can beat this lens, especially comparing it to a full frame equivalent setup. Full frame lenses, 24 to 70 or even 28 to 75, the Tamron full frame lens is gonna cost you like $800, if I remember it correctly, around that price. But this is $500 and it often goes on a discount. So I got this when it was on sale. I got it lucky. So no complaint whatsoever when it comes to price to performance ratio. One really minor but kind of sad truth when it comes to who should get this lens is if you're trying to impress your clients or friends with this lens, or with a bigger lens, I should say, this is not gonna make it. It looks tiny, it looks like a kit lens. So if you need to impress your friends or clients by using a bigger cine lens or anything bigger like full frame lenses, this is not gonna give you that. I don't care, to be honest with you. I have been filming for like a good 2 years or more now, and I used to feel like, oh, I want to impress the people that I'm filming, so I want to bring the biggest gear I have. No, it's not fun. I don't do it anymore. I show them my work, my portfolio, and if they like it, they like it. I'll tell them, hey, this is filmed with this setup, so you have to trust me instead of showing up with a huge lens that you cannot carry for more than 3 minutes. So that's the another thing. Like with this setup, I can carry this for much longer. So if impressing clients or friends with bigger setup is what you want, that's not gonna help. Like this setup is not gonna help that much. The last thing I want to talk about is I wish Sigma, if they're listening or watching any videos about this lens, is to make a 70-200 or even like 70-180 full frame equivalent lens, but in this kind of small compact size, because it's really strange. Last time I checked, I can't really see anything for APS-C Sony cameras with a 70-200 or 70-180 full frame equivalent at f2.8. So if Sigma can try to make a range with that compact size, maybe a little bit bigger, I will just get it. I just don't want to get a full frame 70-200 on my camera because that defeats the purpose of having a small APS-C setup. So if Sigma is listening or watching all the videos about this lens, please, please, please try to make a 70-200 or 70-180 even. I will get it. That's it. Those are the reasons why I really, really like this lens and this combination. I don't really think I will switch lenses unless I really have to use a much ultra wide kind of setup or lens or like a really telephoto lens. If not, then this lens does 90% or 95% of my job. So I don't plan to like put on a different lens on my camera, on my FX30. So if you have a favorite lens that you use all the time with your APS-C Sony camera, let me know in the comment section below. We'll discuss and see if there are other lenses that is just as good as this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.